Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a review of Carson of Venus, Edge of All Worlds. Special thanks to Edgar Burroughs Incorporated for sending me the novels in this series. And so, to answer some obvious questions, what is this? Well, it's a novel, obviously. This is part of the Swords of Eternity story arc. It doesn't say that on the cover, but it's a story arc that's running through the current novels that they're putting out in the Edgar Burroughs universe. And of course, Edgar Burroughs is the creator of Tarzan and John Carter. And so this has basically kind of subplots that run through the different novels with the different characters. And mainly it's two characters, Jason Gridley, who's from the original novels, and then his goddaughter, Victory Harbin, are, for various science fiction-y reasons, are teleported through different worlds in time and space. And that's part of the connection here. And Victory Harbin's story is actually told in these kind of backup novelettes at the end of every novel. You'll get like 20 or 30 pages of Victory Harbin in a different world. It begins on Ploustar at the Earth's core, and that's what comes with the Carson of Venus novel. And then the second novel in this series is Tarzan, Battle for Ploustar, which is both an at the Earth's core novel and a Tarzan novel in one. But on top of that, you also get a Victory Harbin story in The Land That Time Forgot by Mike Wolfer, who does the American Mythology comics, or did the American Mythology comics. And then you have John Carter, Gods of the Forgotten, which recently came out, and it has a story with Victory Harbin in Vana, which is the world inside the moon from the Moon Men trilogy. And then there's going to be one more novel to complete this story arc, and that's going to be Victory Harbin in her own novel. It's going to be called Victory Harbin, Fires of Halos. And by the way, there is a comic tie-in to the novel. This is Carson of Venus, Eye of Amtor. That's a prologue, and it's not needed for the novel. I mean, it's just mentioned in passing, but it's a really good comic, really good story, and with some great art. And it has a backup story of Victory Harbin, and that's an adaptation of the novelette, which is quite good. And by the way, if you're a collector, it is the first appearance of Victory Harbin, and you can actually even get a variant cover that actually has her on it if you want. And this is part of the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, and that means that it's following the same continuity as the old novels, and that it counts as official canon. And this story arc is not the only thing being put out for the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe. There's actually a new Tarzan novel outside of this story arc that recently came out. And Edgar Rice Burroughs is also reprinting the old Burroughs novels as part of their Edgar Rice Burroughs authorized library. They're starting with the Tarzan novels, and they're reprinting with these gorgeous Joe Jusko covers and a lot of extras in the back. And the new batch of them just came out that has Tarzan at the Earth's core and novels like that. So this novel is pretty much available in any format you can think of. It's available in hardcover, softcover, audiobook, Kindle. So however you like to enjoy novels, you can get this. And I don't get many novels, so when people say it's in paperback, I think this format, but this is actually the same size as one of their hardcovers. The only difference is that in a hardcover, the cover is slightly bigger than the pages in the book, but otherwise they are literally the same size, so you're getting the same thing, it's just the cover is different. And you can pretty much get this from any place that sells new books, and you can order it. However, if you order it from EdgarRiceBurroughs.com, they'll throw in a free trading card, which is pretty cool. This first novel comes with this Victory Harbin trading card, which is pretty neat. EdgarRiceBurroughs.com does charge shipping, but they also know how to pack stuff so it gets to you in good condition, which a lot of booksellers, unfortunately, don't know how to do. So do you need to have read the old Carson of Venus novels to follow this one? No, I didn't read them, and I was fine. Now, I have read the comics, but I don't think I needed to at all. This novel, just like Edgar Rice Burroughs' original novels, understands that every story could be someone's first and takes its time to establish the character and establish the world, and I think orients the new reader pretty darn well. And so why would you want to get a Carson of Venus novel? Isn't he just a pale imitation of John Carter? And no, he's not, actually. He is very functionally similar to John Carter. They're both Earthmen who have adventures on another planet. However, in execution, the two series are actually quite different. So John Carter is a soldier who ends up going to Mars through some kind of mysterious means of instant transmission. And Mars is a dry, dying planet. It's barren. It's inhabited by basically differently colored humans, red Martians, yellow Martians, things like that. Mostly. I mean, there are some obvious exceptions like the Tharks who have 4 arms. And since there's no oceans, their ships sail in the air. They have flying airships. Carson of Venus, on the other hand, is this rich dude. He wanted to go to Mars, so he built himself his own rocket ship and tried to fly there, and through a miscalculation ends up on Venus instead. And Venus is this colorful, lush world with forests that stretch to the clouds and vast oceans and all kinds of colorful inhabitants. They have fish people and bird people and people who live in the clouds and all this different stuff. And there are no flying vehicles on Venus when Carson gets there, so he invents their first plane, which he and his friends use to fly around to their different adventures. And so I think the Venus novels essentially let Burroughs write stories that he couldn't do on Mars, and I think both series are well worth picking up. And so let's address the question that's going to keep a lot of people from picking this novel up and some of the others in this series. Why would you want an Edgar Rice Burroughs novel not written by Edgar Rice Burroughs? And so when a creation or creations are so associated with the person who made them, sometimes it's hard to accept when new people contribute to them, right? And so it becomes easier when it's a different medium, like comic books, right? You can be like, oh, those are the comics. But when you go and do something in that same medium as the creator did, it becomes a little more difficult to swallow for a lot of people. You know, you have that thing in the back of your head like, well, this is nice, but I wonder what Burroughs would have done. So what I will say is that Burroughs wrote all the way up until the end, and his series were ongoing, right? He was always adding in new adventures of his characters, and if he kept living past 1950, if he discovered the secret of immortality and was still with us today, he would have probably kept churning out novel after novel of Tarzan and John Carter, and probably characters and situations we couldn't even imagine, right? His works would have evolved and they would have changed for the times, and it's just really intriguing question of if they had kept going, what would those characters be like? And those characters are really great characters. They're as good as anything we see now in the Marvel movies or DC movies or whatever. And I think they deserve to keep going. I think they deserve to have new stories and be there for new generations. To give a comic book example, imagine what would have happened if Batman ended at Bob Kane and Bill Finger, right? We would have never got Return of the Dark Knight. Imagine if X-Men had ended with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. We would have never got the new X-Men with Wolverine. We would have never got Dark Phoenix Saga and Rogue and Gambit and Cable and all those characters, right? And so I think it's great for franchises to keep going as long as they do so in a respectful way. And I'm not saying that this new stuff is ever going to overshadow or eclipse Edgar Rice Burroughs' original works. It's always going to be his universe. It says it right there on the cover, right? I think probably the relationship will be something like kind of Star Wars, right? Disney puts out a ton of new Star Wars stuff, right? But it's all based on those original works. It's always going to be George Lucas's Star Wars, even if there's new stuff added to it that Lucas didn't have anything to do with. And so let's talk about this new story in Edgar Rice Burroughs' universe. So starting with the cover, it is beautiful. I love this cover. It's just beautifully colored. It's dramatic. It wraps around. It's intriguing. I would say that I do wish it could show more of what Venus looks like. It's so beautiful and exotic, and we don't see any of that, but it's still a really nice looking cover. And I think if you're familiar with Carson of Venus, you're going to be like, why does it look all post-apocalyptic, and why is this giant war machine behind him and all this stuff? And even if you're not, it's still a damn cool looking cover. So it begins with an explanation of what the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe is, which is nice. And yes, Burroughs actually did have an interconnected universe with his characters. He was always doing kind of mentions and references and cameos to kind of tie things together. He very rarely did just full-blown crossovers like Tarzan at Earth's Core, but it was still woven together. Jason Gridley actually wove a lot of it together himself, which is probably why he was chosen for this crossover as, you know, one of the characters who would go from world to world. And so it also has a listing of all of Edgar Rice Burroughs' novels, and so there's around 80 novels here. And so all of these are eventually going to be reprinted as part of the Edgar Rice Burroughs Authorized Library. Again, they're starting with Tarzan, but eventually they'll get to all of them, including the old Carson of Venus stuff. And so there's a map of Amtor, and unfortunately this is the only illustration in here. Amtor is, of course, the name of Venus. That's what the natives call it. And I wish there was more illustrations in here. That's the only thing I feel like is missing. But, you know, the story is good, and that's really what you're here for anyway. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I struggled with this first chapter. It is very plot-driven. It's dry, humorless. It doesn't describe a lot of stuff. It doesn't tell you a lot about Venus. And I was like, But then I got to the second chapter. And once I did that, this book is absolutely wonderful all the way to the end. It's funny. It's clever. It's quirky. It describes all the characters, orients you very well. It has a great, just all-star showing of all the different aliens and all the different places that make Venus so lively and interesting and fun. It's exciting. The climax is great. It's pretty much everything you would want out of a Carson of Venus novel. So what I would say to you, right, is that we live in a world where you're probably going to be ordering this online, and a lot of sites have only that first chapter available as a sample. Don't judge this book just by what you see in the sample. It gets way, way better. This is actually really, really good. So the story introduces a new species on Mars, a new civilization that is trying to basically destroy and or conquer the entire planet, and they have this vendetta against Carson of Venus. And so again, it really is kind of this catalyst to send him on this quest that has him meet all kinds of different and interesting creatures that you saw in the previous novels. I think this is really a good primer for Carson of Venus. This will make you want to go back and read those other novels, because they'll tell you, this one will tell you about, you know, some of the places you'll go and some of the people you'll meet. It does definitely capture the feel of Burroughs, and a lot of the scenes in here could certainly have been done by Burroughs. However, there are definitely some of its own twists that it puts on the series, and that's fine, right? Being faithful is great. You don't have to emulate. You don't have to copy what came before in order to be faithful and pay homage to it. So one of the things that is different in here is the appearance of Jason Gridley, and that feels very random, you know, and definitely a very kind of modern kind of comic book thing where he's just kind of teleporting in for a couple chapters and then just mysteriously disappears, presumably to end up on some other planet. Again, that feels very much like, you know, kind of a modern comic book sort of thing. However, what works here that doesn't work in a lot of comics is that this is not a tangent that brings the story to a screeching halt and takes it in some direction that's meaningless to the rest of the novel. Jason Gridley appears, and he helps Carson of Venus get through what he is currently going through in those chapters, right? It does not slow the momentum of the story. It works into the story and keeps it going, which I think works. However, in the context of this, I really don't know enough about Victory or Jason to necessarily care too much about them when they're mentioned or show up in this story. Jason Gridley just seems like some random smart guy who happens to be an adventurer. But if you can wait until the end of the novelette definitely fills in and tells you who those characters are and kind of brings everything together. And the villains of the story are pretty good villains. I mean, they're well written for what they are, and they create a very epic challenge. And again, that the final battle is just really epic and could be a movie. It's fantastic. But the villains are kind of very comic booky in their motivation and their portrayal for most of the novel. They are supposed to be trying to conquer the entire planet because they're mad at one guy, Carson of Venus. Kind of reminds me of Cyborg Superman from Reign of the Supermen. And, all we see of them is, for the most of the novel, is either them attacking something or them building their war machines to attack stuff, right? And that's it. That's their entire civilization. Now, we learn a little bit more about them at the end, and there is a plot twist in their motivation, but even that feels a little comic booky. However, it does also, weirdly enough, parallel some real world conspiracy theories, and I just want you to keep in mind when you're reading this was released in April of 2020, so the pandemic didn't have anything to do with the writing of this novel. The plot twist at the end is not inspired by and certainly not endorsing any conspiracy theories we have right now. And then there's the novelette in the back with Victory Harbin and Pellucidar. And so it's written by Christopher Paul Carey, who's also going to be doing the Victory Harbin novel. And it's very interesting because I read the comic first, and I gotta say, the comic is great because it has visuals to it, but I like the story here better because the novelette tells you Jason Gridley's point of view. In the comic, all you got was the dialogue, and it's very directly adapted, but there's just a lot that we don't get context for in that dialogue that we get out of Jason Gridley's basically commentary on it that you get in the novelette. They'll say a line of dialogue, and then Jason Gridley will be like, well, that's just the way we talk. We're just picking on each other. Little nuances like that you just didn't get out of the comic. And also it fleshes out his character. I now know who he is. I now appreciate who he is. And honestly, I wouldn't have minded having that at the beginning of the novel, because I think his appearance during Carson of Venus, Edge of All Worlds, would have been a little bit more meaningful if I'd had a little bit more about the character. Like the novel, the novelette is entertaining and well written, but it's only a beginning for the character, and it's only getting Victory Harbin up to the point where she's going to have adventures, but you need to pick up the next novel in order to finally see her go on an adventure. It's very similar to A Princess of Mars, right? At the beginning, you have an opening where John Carter is prospecting for gold. He gets in trouble with Native Americans, and he ends up in a cave, and then, he has this out-of-body experience, and then he ends up on Mars. This is the point of getting Victory Harbin to that cave, right? Next, she's going to start having her adventures on other worlds, right? The next time we see her. And it's a very cryptic novelette. It's basically just there to establish a mystery and establish these two characters, all of which it does, but you're not going to know exactly what that portal is they got sucked into or how it worked or anything. That's going to be answered in future novels, right? It does establish some very intriguing things about Victory Harbin's background, like the fact that she's from Pellucidar, the prehistoric world at the Earth's core, and that her mother is from the surface world and is Gretchen von Harbin, who was a character who was a child in the Tarzan twins novels. And there is actually some comic books from American mythology that flesh this out. They're written by Mike Wolfer and Christopher Paul Carey, And so the story of how Gretchen von Harben met Victory's father is told in Ploustar Across Savage Seas, which has been completed. All 4 issues of that are out. And they actually did a series devoted to Victory Harben called Beyond the Furthest Star, Warriors of Xandar. And this is her in full adventure mode. This is, after she's gotten her bearings and she has her weapons and her suit and a really awesome alien pet named Hucklebuck, and it is amazing. This really sold me on this character. So overall, yes, I do definitely recommend this novel. It's fantastic, and I look forward to reading the rest of the series, and I'll be doing reviews of those when I'm done with them as well. All right, like and subscribe for more videos, and until next time, see ya.